أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Chapter 6. Hijab. Question. What is oppressive about the mandatory hijab requirements for women in some Muslim countries? Answer. It is oppressive because women can't wear whatever they want. They don't have the ability to choose. Question. But is there any country in the world that allows people to wear whatever they want, i.e. unlimited choice? Answer. Yes, Western countries, of course. Question. In these Western countries, can a person walk around in public with his genitals exposed? Answer. Well, no. Question. So would requiring her to cover himself be oppressive according to your definition of oppression? Wouldn't this mean that these countries, a person can't always choose? Answer. No, because exposing one's genitals violates principles of decency and civility. It's very different from exposing one's hair. Question. Who decided that exposing one particular area of the body, genitalia, violates decency and civility, and exposing another part of the body, hair, is perfectly acceptable? Answer. That's just what is normal. Question. Who decided that? What is that based on? Where does such an idea even come from? Answer. Question. Are you not aware of the hundreds of cultures and societies past and present that draw the lines differently, that have different conceptions of nudity, that have different standards of decency, etc.? Answer. Question. Do you have any principled basis to appeal to at least try to justify why Western standards should be the default around the world and even in Muslim countries? Answer. You see, Islamic standards of public dress are based on divine commands. What should or should not be covered comes from what Allah has commanded. And insofar as we believe in Allah, we follow that guidance and strive to understand the larger cosmic significance and wisdom of those commands. Others might not believe in any of this, but at least Muslims have a reasoning that follows higher principles. But the Western standards of dress imposed on all are based on nothing more than cultural norms, and cultural norms have no principled basis. They ultimately boil down to, this is just what we do, or this is what we found our forefathers doing, and we just follow them because that's what is comfortable. There's nothing more to it. Yet they are so confident and so militant when it comes to their views on dress, views that are ultimately based on nothing. But our views are based on the firmest foundation, yet we easily cave in and throw it away for the sake of meaningless cliches about choice and freedom, cliches that fall apart with the slightest bit of scrutiny. NB. The above does not constitute the reason a Muslim woman should wear hijab. It is rather the response to a very specific and very common argument made against Islam and Muslim societies, namely that they are oppressive, irrational, and do not respect the freedom of choice. Productive ways to discuss the hijab. Do we have a problem with countries that ban people from wearing KKK garb or Nazi uniforms or Confederate flags in public? Hopefully not. But what if the people of a country, like France, feel about the hijab how we feel about KKK, Nazi, and Confederate dress? This is not speculation. This is more or less what secularists in France, Germany, and elsewhere argue, namely that the hijab represents to them the worst kind of oppression, and it doesn't matter what Muslims say, the hijab means anymore than what neo-Nazis say the swastika means. All that matters is what the hijab symbolizes to them and to their society at large. Muslims should contest that characterization, but that would have to involve something more substantive than I should have the freedom to wear whatever I want. That argument is certainly not going to move anyone, much less disabuse the secularists of their negative attitudes towards the hijab. Insisting that the hijab is a choice is equally ineffective since the secularists don't really disagree. They believe the hijab is part of a larger system of patriarchal oppression, and that Muslim women are so steeped in that system that they don't even realize that they are being subjugated by means of veil, despite their conscious choice to wear it. So how else could Muslims engage in a productive dialogue with non-Muslims about the hijab? Using the example of the Virgin Mary when speaking to Christians is an obvious choice. We should draw on other historical examples. Modern bare-all dress, after all, is a recent aberration. We should discuss the effects of nudity and the sexualization of public spaces on people's behaviors and their psychologies, i.e. their hearts and minds. What about the significance of covering up and adorning oneself with fabric being uniquely human? Muslims, of course, draw on our knowledge of Adam and Eve, but even secularists have to admit that animals don't cover in the same way. Animals don't use fabric to hide the body and obfuscate its contours. Secularists certainly celebrate human reason, which is another distinguishing factor that sets humanity apart from the animal kingdom. Covering the body ought to be understood similarly as a mark of humanity. But even if secularists want to invoke naturalism and claim that nudity is more natural as demonstrated by the animal kingdom, we should consider how even that is not exactly the case. Look at mating rituals and how males and females will adorn themselves and will participate in intricate dances and movements to attract the other. Even for animals, mating is not some brute affair of two naked bodies coming in contact and copulating. No, even animals take each other's clothes very seriously. Coloration, thickness of fur, intricacy of pigmentation patterns, etc. Even animals are concerned with externalities and form in a deliberate and even sophisticated way. And there are more than a few species where the female in particular will hide herself from males and make herself scarce, so that the males have to work extra hard to prove themselves in order to win over their better half. But apparently, some humans think that stripping down to their skin or baring their bodies in other ways, taking pictures of said bodies, and matching on a smartphone dating app is all that is necessary and desirable before exposing themselves to intimacy and all its vulnerabilities. And what about futurism? If you look at the cusp of experimental fashion, you will see much that is reminiscent of the hijab. Certainly women covering the face and hair is part of some of these fashions. If Western culture and society is continuously advancing, undoubtedly, the styles of today will be obsolete tomorrow. Such is the endless march of progress, we are told. If women today are inclined to skimpier outfits and brandishing their hair, it serves to reason that preference will shift and the trend will reverse. In which case, Muslim dress is hardly out of place in that wider context. These are just brief examples, but each one has the potential to lead to thought-provoking discussions about the significance and meaning of dress. And as I keep saying, that's the level of discussion that needs to happen, on the level of meaning and values. Invoking empty notions like freedom of choice forestalls that discussion, sabotages it, and puts Muslim in a losing position. Time to change our strategy. The French and the hijab. You have to admire the French. They have strong views about what parts of the body should and should not be covered. Muslims used to have strong views about what parts of the body should and should not be covered. The French base their views on some vague, baseless metaphysical notions of human dignity and, of course, a rejection of God. But their conviction is unmatched. Muslims base their views on their commitment to God, His laws, and the grounding of religious and spiritual ethics, but apparently all that does not inspire real conviction in some of them, at least not the conviction the French enjoy. After all, the French are willing to stake a claim and say boldly, "This is what is proper, this is what is right." The most some Muslims can say in response to this is, "Yeah, you're probably right, but maybe some women want to wear a veil every now and then, and their choice should be respected if that's okay with you. And if not, then shame on you for not respecting the choice, boo-hoo-hoo." Why should the French or anyone else respect that? They believe that the veil is fundamentally an affront to civilization. They believe it is an abomination. There is no respect for what one finds morally detestable. Rather than address the issue on that moral level, rather than find a back and make the deeper arguments that cut to the core of the issue and doggedly interrogate the assumptions and inconsistencies underlying French and Western attitudes about the human body, nudity, sex, and gender, rather than do this serious work, we are content to sit and whine about respecting choice and religious freedom and all this nonsense which is not even our vocabulary. It's not a part of our intellectual tradition, but we use it anyway because we think others will accept it. Newsflash, they won't. So tip to the hat to the French. If only some of these Muslims had an ounce of your conviction, it would be Muslims setting standards of dress for you instead of the other way around. Fallacies regarding hijab. Does hijab have any effect on sexual harassment? This is a common argument I hear against the utility of modest dress and the hijab, namely that modestly dressed women, even women in full hijab, are still victims of catcalling and sexual assault, so clearly modest dress and hijab have no impact in protecting women from sexual harassment. But this is a flawed argument because no one claims that dressing modestly will completely foreclose on the possibility of receiving negative attention. The claim is simply that, all else being equal, modest dress, for example hijab, significantly reduces the likelihood of such harassment. So yes, while women in hijab are unfortunately frequent victims of catcalling in Cairo's busy streets, for example, the undeniable fact remains that the harassment would be much, much worse if these women were dressed in yoga pants, tank tops, and other common Western styles. And it helps that the relevant ayah is clear on its own. Quote, "O Prophet, tell your wives and your daughters and the women of the believers to bring down over themselves part of their outer garments. That is more suitable that they will be known and not be abused. And ever is Allah forgiving and merciful." End quote. Al-Ahzab, Quran, chapter 33, verse 59. There is no practical purpose for the hijab. This is a conversation between person A and person B. Person A: "I'm done with seatbelts. They're a waste of time." Person B: "What are you, crazy?" Person A: "Not at all. Wearing a seatbelt is just symbolic, an empty ritual. Some would even say a performance of piety to show the world how much you abide by arbitrary laws sent down to us from on high. And while some people choose to undertake that performance, and I respect their choice, I choose to forego it." Person B: "Well, yeah, you can describe it like that, but that doesn't mean seatbelts are useless. They serve an important practical purpose." Person A: "Huh, like what?" Person B: "For starters, they protect you from getting hurt in a car accident." Person A: "That's ridiculous. Did you know that some people wear seatbelts and still get injured when they get into a car wreck? Some people even die despite wearing a seatbelt. Clearly, seatbelts are useless and do absolutely nothing to protect you." Person B: "What? Just because a seatbelt doesn't magically save you from any and all harm doesn't mean it's useless." Person A: "Sorry, but you're wrong. I know plenty of people who were wearing a seatbelt and still got injured. Some of these people were even driving in countries where wearing seatbelts is very common. Can you believe that?" Person B: "You're making a logical error. Just because a seatbelt does not and cannot protect you 100% doesn't mean that it provides no protection at all. All else being equal, wearing the seatbelt significantly reduces the possibility of injury and death." Person A: "Stop shaming non-seatbelt wearers. If I'm driving without a seatbelt and I get hit by a drunk driver and I get seriously injured or die, that's the drunk driver's fault, not mine. Stop it with your disgusting victim blaming." Person B: "What? Obviously the drunk driver is at fault, but that has nothing to do with wearing a seatbelt. The fact that there are crazy irresponsible people in the world doesn't take anything away from the practicality of wearing a seatbelt. In fact, the existence of those irresponsible people makes wearing a seatbelt all the more essential from a practical perspective." Person A: "I'm done with your seatbelt splaining. You disgust me." Person B: Person A: "Just another example of seatbelt wearers' privilege, smugly judging those of us who want to exercise our free choice about what we wear while driving. This is exactly what is wrong with the world today." Person B: "I don't mean to offend you. Actually, if you look in your car's owner's manuals, even the car manufacturers themselves say you need to wear a seatbelt to prevent injury. Are the car manufacturers being smug and insensitive too?" Person A: "That's just your biased seatbelt wearing interpretation of the owner's manual. We need a non-seatbelt wearer's interpretation of the owner's manual. Stop pretending like you have exclusive right to interpret the owner's manual because you don't." Person B: "I don't think the owner's manual is ambiguous on this." Person A: "That's enough. You have no idea what it's like to be me and what I have been through while driving my car. So you have a lot of nerve telling me whether or not I should wear a seatbelt. And to make matters worse, you want to shame me into silence with the owner's manual? Do you even own a car?" Person B: "No, but I don't see how that changes." Person A: "Wow, you're not even a car owner, but you want to lecture me on seatbelts. Do yourself a favor and shut up." Thus concludes yet another productive discussion on hijab and sexual harassment. By the way, here's the relevant passage from our owner's manual. Quote, "O Prophet, tell your wives and your daughters and the women of the believers to bring down over themselves part of their outer garments. That is more suitable that they will be known and not be abused. And ever is Allah forgiving and merciful." End quote. Al-Ahzab, Quran, chapter 33, verse 59. Hijab and empowerment cliches. Is wearing the hijab empowering? When Muslim feminists say this, they explain it by appealing to the notion of choice. A Muslim woman is empowered because she can choose to dress as she wants. The choice is what confers the power. But if this is what is meant by empowerment, then if a woman chooses to dress in a bikini or something else, that would be equally empowering since it is based on her choice. Is it any wonder that young Muslim girls who have been raised on this notion of empowerment choose to forego the hijab entirely? Why bother with the hijab when what is important is choice and feeling empowered? You can feel empowered wearing fashionable clothes, looking sexy, getting guys to notice you. That feels a lot more empowering to the average woman or teen girl in our society than covering up, getting stared at by people, etc. So let's drop the empowerment cliches, please, because even if it did make sense to some people at some point, at the end of the day, it has done a lot more harm than good. What is amazingly ironic is that if we really want to talk about hijab in terms of empowerment, there is a very obvious and compelling way to do so. As it turns out, covering yourself, hiding in plain sight, shielding yourself from public view is universally understood as empowering. Think of the CIA, MI6, and the other secret covert agencies. A large part of their power comes from being out of public view and being hidden. The most powerful people of the world stay out of public view. They avoid the tabloids and the photo ops. The US Supreme Court judges, for example, are notoriously private. Many of the meetings between the world's richest people and politicians happen behind closed doors. And this is not something new. Sultans and kings of the past made an art out of avoiding the gaze of the commoner. To be seen by regular people was seen as diminishing to one's status. If they had no choice but to travel through common streets, some Ottoman sultans would even don the veil to avoid being seen. This is not unlike modern politicians and rulers riding in their black limos with tinted windows. But for some reason, people today think that bearing it all for all to see is what is empowering. How foolish! How contrary to common sense! Not only do they uncover their bodies, they even display the intimate details of their private lives. Social media makes it increasingly easy to let strangers into your home. This is the opposite of empowering. This is enslaving yourself to the eyes of others. Instead of controlling the information people have about you, you give it away for free, handing them the key to your soul. All societies understand the value of privacy, but this is a concept that has been thoroughly eroded for us today due to the influence of corrupt ideologies like feminism. Seen in this light, we can reflect on the possible wisdom of the hijab. Women, as opposed to men, certainly have more that can be coveted, though men have much to hide as well. But women ultimately have more information to hide, so to speak. They are more vulnerable to the predatory gaze of others, whether those of men or even women. This is just due to the qualities Allah has given women. So given these assets, should women just give away everything for free? They could, but that would be contrary to reason and common sense. Not only would it be a major lost opportunity, it would also make them vulnerable to harm in 1,000 different ways. Fact of the matter is, women in the past understood the high value of not being available for public view, and they leveraged this power for their personal ends, whether social, financial, familial, or even political. But modern academics and researchers simplistically think, those poor, powerless, voiceless Muslim women and their veils, how degrading, how oppressive, what a tragedy. Little do they know that they're the ones living the tragedy. And of course, we know that the ultimate reason one wears a hijab is to be obedient to Allah and follow His commands with devotion and sincerity. Allah knows best. Hijab is about choice and other confusions. It is baseless and empty for Muslim women to talk about the hijab by endlessly invoking the concept of choice. In what sense does anyone choose his clothes? Western women naively believe their wardrobes to be a function of free and independent choice, yet despite the belief, the vast majority of garb coincidentally falls within the narrow bounds of current fashion, and the diktats of Versace, Chanel, and an interminable supply of hot or not lists Western women follow with a fervent taqlid that would make the most fastidious Sufi murids seem delinquent. If the way women in society dress were purely a function of independent choice, we would see widely varying styles, widely varying parts of the body exposed and covered, widely varying sources for these clothes, etc. But we don't see that in Western society. We see relative uniformity in every way. Women, and men too obviously, in society tend to dress alike, abiding by shared notions of nudity, shared notions of what is appropriate, what is fashionable, etc. A big part of the uniformity is that the majority of people get their clothes from the same retail outlet chains. Sure, colors may vary, cuts and fabrics may vary, but it's the same basic themes shared by all, yet people are under the impression that what they wear is by choice. Really, it's nothing but an over-exaggerated sense of individualism. Sure, you might have chosen the kind of blouse to wear, but in the larger sense, you didn't choose to cover your chest. You didn't choose the retail stores in your area. You didn't choose the mass-distributed designs that were rolled out into these stores, etc., etc. No matter how narrow a range of variation you give people, they will come to think of themselves as practicing agency within that narrow range. Given how obsessed Western society is with choice and individuality, this is inevitable. You have an army of women with the same yoga pants, ugly boots, black jackets, wearing the same cheap accessories, wearing the same low-quality perfume from the same mass distributors, coloring their faces with the same chemicals in the same patterns, and telling Muslim women in hijab that they are oppressed, lack agency, lack freedom of choice, etc. And you have those same Muslim women writing op-eds, speaking out in interviews, pleading that they do indeed have a choice, just like their non-Muslim, non-veiled counterparts. Stop saying dumb things about hijab. Unfortunately, everything Muslims today say and write about hijab is polluted with distortions and misconceptions that occlude the meaning, purpose, and significance of the veil. The stark reality is the hijab cannot be defended by feminism. The hijab has nothing to do with women's liberation or women's choice or women's empowerment or objectification or any of these modern philosophical concepts that are not only external to the Islamic worldview but were historically defined in opposition to the Islamic worldview as a means to attack it. See, when someone says we should reject Orthodox Islam because Orthodox Islam is not compatible with feminism, our response should not be some strained attempt to show how Islam is indeed feminist and all Muslims are feminists and the Quran is feminist, etc., etc. ad nauseum. Our response ought to be to ask, why should anyone care about feminism? It should then be followed a thorough intellectual critique of feminism, showing what a base, destructive, inconsistent, and incoherent philosophy it really is, and how despite its claim to further the interests of women, it actually undermines those interests and has done immeasurable damage to the female condition and the human condition in our times. That would be a principled response, but it would be politically incorrect, I guess. So, never mind. Wouldn't want to offend anyone, right? Non-Muslims love burkinis, but why? Explaining Islam using the vocabulary of liberalism is, at best, counterproductive. Saying that something is freeing or liberating is an empty claim because anything and everything can be conceived by someone as liberating. Some people feel liberated by X and others feel liberated by Y. It's entirely subjective. So you're not saying anything meaningful by resorting to these empty terms, especially when people's understanding of liberty is so heavily influenced by contemporary cultural sensibilities, and hence they are inclined to believe Muslims when they say the hijab or whatever else is liberating or empowering, etc. It is especially counterproductive for us as Muslims to use this vocabulary because there is so much meaning to convey in our deen and our tradition. Why don't we tap into that expansive, deep reservoir of meaning to talk to our neighbors, our friends, our family? Why do we insist on scraping the shallow puddle of liberalism instead? How not to argue against the burkini ban. When Muslims argue against burkini ban or hijab bans or grounds of freedom of choice, they are being inconsistent. All societies regulate dress and impose standards of dress in one way or another. They might not always do it through explicit laws banning garment X or mandating garment Y. Most often it is done through social pressure. For example, the reason some Muslim women in the West decide to take off the hijab is due to social pressure. By wearing the hijab, they feel like fish out of water. They feel the stares from strangers and it makes them uncomfortable. Maybe they have secular relatives that bug them about it and pressure them to not wear it. Little things like that accumulate until they decide to take off the hijab or change their dress in other ways to conform to social standards. In this way, society controls how people dress, and when it comes to Muslim garb, this pressure is quite powerful and relentless. So this whole notion of free choice makes no sense in the context of these powerful social pressures. People might experience their choices as self-generated, even though the truth of the matter is that people typically choose from the limited options social circumstances allow. But that is not the point I want to make here. The point I want to make is that Muslims too should want to exert social control. In the ideal society of a Muslim, dressing according to Allah's standards is the norm. And even if in this ideal society there are no overt dress codes enforced by the law akin to what you find in some Muslim countries, there's still going to be the social pressure of a religious bent. In that ideal society, the women in the bikinis and tight skirts are the fish out of water, and they will feel the pressure to dress like everyone else around them, even if there weren't any dress code laws to penalize them. In this way, Islamic religious norms would be imposed in much the same way Western standards of dress are imposed today. So what is the ideal society Muslims envision? Is it not the society of the Prophet ﷺ? Even if we suppose that the early Muslims abided by strict secularism and did not have overt regulations policing the dress of Muslims and non-Muslims in public, like we find in some Muslim countries today, we still know that the majority of people in that society dressed conservatively according to Islamic norms. And wouldn't those norms put a lot of pressure on everyone, Muslims and non-Muslims, to dress similarly? Wouldn't that amount to social control and religious imposition, i.e., namely, exactly the kind of imposition secularism and these freedom of choice arguments eschew? The only way to avoid the inconsistency is to either deny the validity of the freedom of choice arguments and stop using them when convenient, or to deny that the societies ruled by the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba were ideal. Put it another way, the kind of society that is implied by commitment to freedom of choice exist, even in theory. And if it could exist, it would not look like the kind of society Muslims value and aspire to. For those reasons, freedom of choice should not be invoked whenever hijab or other aspects of Islamic garb come under fire. Consistency is important. Wearing hijab as disobedience. In a recent BBC documentary about Islam and women, a young Muslim woman who wears hijab was asked whether hijab is a form of oppression. Her response was absolutely chilling. Quote, "For someone to tell me I have to wear hijab, if someone tells me to do that, I'm taking my hijab off. If you're going to force me to wear the hijab, I'm taking it off. I wear this out of love. This is my identity. This is something that I love, and I wouldn't even say that I do it because my God tells me to do it. Everything that my God tells me to do, He gives me a choice. I'm doing it because I want to do it and I love it. It's part of my religion and I own it." End quote. The scary thing is, many younger Muslims will not understand why this is so objectionable. They will not recognize the kufr implied in a statement like this. This is the subtle corrosive power of liberalism that deeply affects people without them even realizing it. How could you think, if God tells me to do something, I won't do it? Well, it makes sense if you have been indoctrinated. If you're forced to do something, then that takes away from your autonomy. It takes away from your ability to freely choose. And anything that reduces your freedom and liberty in this way is evil. To take away your ability to choose is to take away from your identity, from who you are. And what could be worse than that? Asks the young Muslim who is steeped in the social justice warrior-infused identity politics of the age, promoted by Muslims and non-Muslims alike. The sticking point is here. But doesn't God command us to do certain things and prohibit us from other things? And aren't there steep consequences for not submitting and obeying to God? This is precisely what force and coercion are. It is through this line of reasoning that those Muslims affected by liberalism face two options. Option 1, God is evil, wa na'udhu billah. Option 2, God is not evil, but God doesn't command us or prohibit us in anything either. Both options are kufr. The way out of this dilemma is to critique liberalism and deconstruct concepts like freedom, autonomy, coercion, etc. Feminism and hijab, or the dangers of uncritically adopting modernist discourse. The way we dress or undress can negatively impact others. Both Islamic ethics and secular law acknowledge this. Islamically, for example, we know that the gaze affects the heart and the mind. If society is saturated with images of people in a state of undress, and the streets are full of men and women flaunting their bodies, this leads to corruption and widespread fasad. But even secular culture recognizes the negative consequences of such nudity. This is proven by the fact that schools and other institutions maintain strict dress codes. Also, all countries have indecent exposure laws, and there have been numerous scientific studies expounded on the psychological and neurological harms of pornography. The point of all this is to show that yes, your clothes matter, and it is wrong and deeply destructive for feminists to claim that women can dress or undress however they want and no one has the right to tell them otherwise. Yes, people do have the right to tell women how to dress. In fact, Western governments exercise that right to tell women and men how to dress when it comes to what they define as indecent exposure. So, if Western governments exercise that right, why can't Islamic law? It's the same underlying principle, except that what Western society considers indecent is not exactly what Islamic law considers as such. What Western society considers indecent is highly influenced by changing culture. In contrast, Islamic standards are based on the timeless wisdom of the Creator of human beings, who knows our nature and knows what is truly beneficial or harmful. Consider the Quran on the issue of women's dress. Quote, "O Prophet, tell thy wives and daughters and the believing women that they should cast their outer garments over their persons when abroad, that is most convenient, that they should be known as such and not molested, and Allah is oft forgiving, most merciful." End quote. Al-Ahzab, Quran chapter 33, verse 59. One of the central purposes of covering is spelled out very clearly in this verse, to avoid molestation and harassment. Here we see the wisdom of hijab. how it is objectively beneficial, how it is rational and most conducive to justice on the personal and societal level. Contrary to what modernist Muslims seem to believe, hijab is not an empty ritual with only symbolic significance. It is secular thought that wants to portray the hijab as a mere cultural fossil with no moral relevance at best, and as an impractical tool of oppression by men and nothing else at worst. It is a secular mindset to equate the hijab and the bikini and say that they are both equally expressions of women's freedom because they both represent a woman's choice and therefore her empowerment. No, hijab is practically, rationally, and morally superior. Be proud of that instead of repeating stale cliches about the power of choice. Do you not believe that Allah has commanded the hijab for a purpose, a wisdom, and the benefit of humanity? If so, then you should reject the modernist claim that it is a good thing for people to expose their bodies. You should reject the idea that everyone has a right to expose themselves to their own liking. You should believe that there is a practical benefit for hijab in the same way that there is a practical benefit that we readily recognize in avoiding alcohol, gambling, pork, etc. Obviously, if you live in a non-Muslim society, there's hardly ever a possibility of imposing these beliefs on others, but that doesn't mean you cannot believe that these injunctions are the most correct, just, and beneficial for all of humanity, and that the way things are done all around us is detrimental and the cause of corruption and suffering. Cherishing and nurturing this belief is important. If, among other things, we want our children to observe proper hijab in the future. If we don't believe that hijab has this practical benefit, there's little chance many in the next generation will feel the need to adopt what they will see as empty symbolic gestures or cultural relics of a prior, unenlightened generation. Indeed, this is what we see today, not only among the youth, but also the previous few generations. If you look at our condition, Muslim women today are leaving the hijab en masse. Why is that? And this is not just to say that Muslim women who are at fault here, or to blame anyone who does not wear hijab. No. We are all responsible and we are all struggling, but let's struggle with clear-mindedness. O Muslims, throw away the empty cliches and open your eyes. Sadaqallahul Azim.